welcome to another episode of the AETHERICA podcast for the modern philosopher magician. I'm Sky Mathis, joined with Ike Baker. How you doing, Ike?
Very good, man. I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
Me as well. I'm excited. We're going to discuss a little bit of esoteric symbolism, some kind of Golden Dawn insights, and then potentially get into some guy named Cornelius Agrippa. Apparently knew a thing or two about magic. But yeah, so I guess just to open it up, there's a couple other things I want to touch on that I didn't mention, but I'll just ask you in this question. Broadly speaking, I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be in regards to like any particular tradition, but I would assume that there's a lot of crossover between many traditions. I wanted to talk a little bit about like proper purification and cleansing practices. That's something that's kind of interesting to me. Maybe it could be like spiritual, mental work, could be burning sage, maybe some common herbs used in rituals. So yeah, maybe you could first elaborate on the purpose or the importance of cleansing, whether it be, your space, your soul, as within, so without, and then maybe talk a little bit about different methods, practices, historical, tried and true, revered accoutrement. Is that the word?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
yeah.
I guess I would say implements, but
Implements. Yeah. Any of that.
okay.
Stuff.
So I guess I'll start with what? Purification first?
Yeah, sure.
So that's obviously a prerequisite. Sine qua non means you cannot do without of all types of magic and particularly initiation. This question alone could be its own episode. It's of central importance, and it's one of the first things that you learn to do because it's one of the first things that you have to do. It's one of the first things that has to happen to you, and particularly in initiatic lineages. And it never really ends. You just keep, it becomes a method of working, so purification it serves several purposes. Let's put it in a ritual context. The ritual context is that it does separate, it is one step in a series of steps that isolates your magical consciousness and brings that to the fore and kind of delineates, the casting off of the day's cares and the mundane day-to-day, minute-to-minute personality that's thinking about food and sex and, whatever petty grievances and things that you don't want to do. So obviously, practiced ritualists have less of an issue casting that off depending on the day, but there are also several it's part of this whole kind of pre-roll to your ritual. You're getting changed. One of the first things that you do is you can do, it's advised that you do, particularly in the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn system, you take a ritual bath. That can take many forms. I do not get in a bath. I shower because it's too time consuming to draw a bath. But the symbolism is there, and symbolism is extremely powerful. It can influence your states of mind, obviously, very obviously. Not that it can, it does. It's just to what degree and in what direction does it influence it. And I think that that's a huge thing with something like sage. I'm not sold on this idea that I'm burning a plant and spirits are fleeing. I mean, I know that incense, well, at least from the perspective of Dr. Stephen Skinner, right, who's one of the most accomplished and practiced, not only occult academics, but grimoire magicians that are alive today. He says that incense is key. They don't the spirits when being called do not like the smell of people.
And is that applicable to both malevolent and benevolent spirits?
Not in my experience. Um, but I don't know if he'd have something different to say. I think he may have had something different to say when I had him on the podcast several months ago. But you know, that's his experience, and I am not somebody who says, well, that's his truth. I'm sure there's an objective component to that. And one of the things that's very interesting too is that because purification can take place in one of two ways, or typically both in the Golden Dawn: water and fire. Fire is purificatory. That's the greater purifying agent. You can't just expose things to fire immediately. They have to be gradually kind of purified. And so you begin with water, and then you go on to fire in most cases. Again, nothing here is a rule that is set in stone. There's just protocols that have a certain effect based on their sequence. For instance, there's certain ritual degrees and work that you do where fire is the first thing to come in and purify. And in a lot of cases, though, we're talking about the sacrificing of animal natures. For instance, when it is said that the high priest in the tabernacle or the Temple of Solomon as well, in the Hebraic tradition, when they approached the Holy of Holies, they first offered burnt sacrifice. And this was to symbolize, according to esoteric tradition, the casting off or the sacrifice of their animal passions, their desires. And then they washed in the brass laver of purification. So there's always a twofold purification, really, in magic: fire and water. Water usually comes first. In some cases, fire will come first. A lot of this, something that's interesting too is that if you read the ancient Greek texts, right, when they were wrapping animal bones in fat, that was supposedly the choicest cut, was the fatty parts, and they would wrap the fat in the bones of an animal carcass, and that is what they, in Homeric tradition, that is what they offered up to the gods, specifically Zeus, and it was because they delighted in that smell. They loved the smell of the burnt fat, and the bone, and that was so that's another interesting thing if we're talking about like incense.
Yeah, so I was gonna
But
say, I guess when you're talking about this historical references and whatnot, offering this form of sacrifice in the form of burning to the gods or the spirits, so it's like that's a preferable, that's something preferable that is choice for the
well,
spirits, but not the incense so much. Or
that's well. Here's the thing. That was for Zeus. In the Homeric tradition, they did that for the gods, right? Whereas various incense was offered to spirits. You got to realize, like, we're not talking incense like we have incense now. It was, some kind of smolder of dried or even fresh herbs, depending on the ritual preparation and what it called for. But they didn't have incense sticks, but there were a lot of things that had to do with purification back then. Incense was a way of purifying the air to them. Fire was a way of purifying material from its dross. Water was a way of, obviously washing away the grime and the dirt, and kind of, it's refreshing. You get into like 1800s, mesmerism and theosophical traditions. They talk about things having an etheric charge. Cold water is the fastest way to decharge something of its etheric. You run it under cold water, and it'll decharge something that has built up etheric energy, like static electricity. On the other hand, Mesmer and his students they would etherically charge a full glass of water and have the patient drink it. But aside from those minor digressions, just out of interest and them popping up into my mind, this is the way my brain works. I just start and it's like I'm going down a hallway and things just jump out of doors at me. But um but then oil was a huge purificatory agent because they didn't have soap in the West in a lot of those pre-modern traditions. I want to say, really before the Crusades. I'm pretty sure it was the Perso-Arabics who popularized soap in Europe, but I could be wrong though. But oil was another way to purify the body, and various methods of doing all this stuff, and everything I just said plays a part in ritual and in magic. But it's, to this day, you look at like the ritual of like the Catholic Church, for instance, they cense and they asperge, right? They use fire to generate the incense, the coals. It's typically, they use resin, like incense resin, teardrops of either myrrh or frankincense is the big one. And you know it when you smell that church smell, if you're a Catholic or Orthodox. And they have the aspergil, which is essentially this. It's just a rod with a metal ball on the end of it, metal rod and ball. They dip it into the holy water and they just fling it at the crowd. And you're sitting there, praying, taking water on the face. You're like, it's but so even to this day, in like the major ritual that happens typically in the United States, which is the Christian forms of high mass, they purify the space, and the lesser ritual of the pentagram, and absolutely to a greater extent the greater rituals. There's all sorts of things that are meant to purify a space, and you purify things. One of the basic ways is like keep everything clean. Keep it dust free. Don't go into a ritual like after the gym without showering. That grime, from a certain perspective, it does attract this. It does attract a certain type of etheric quality, and or etheric energy with a certain quality that is low, very low vibration. To have things kind of not clean and unkempt, and there's all these different formulas that you can use. We use in the Golden Dawn, we use the Chaldean Oracles are a huge formula. Therefore the priest that governeth the works of fire must sprinkle with the lustral waters of the loud resounding sea. That's obviously the Chaldean line for, or the oracle for purification by water. And the one by fire is when after all the phantoms have been banished, thou shalt see that holy and formless fire, that fire which darts and flashes through the hidden depths of the universe. Hear thou the voice of fire. Typically, you would do that with incense of some kind. And these are from the Chaldean Oracles. And there are two more, elementally, one for earth, one for air. But those are the purificatory canticles, or whatever you want to call them. So purification has to happen first, and typically it's multi-layered, but there's lots of ways to do it. There's a symbolism to it, but there's also something that you're actually doing. There's a symbolism that is exalting and purifying in terms of, psychologically, but there is also an etheric quality to purification. There is an astral quality to purification. These things are different. Etheric and astral do not mean the same thing. They likely don't mean what you think they do. So really it's a threefold purification every time you open a working space, a temple space.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking too is even with soap, modern soap, you yourself, you make soap. And so,
yes,
very well, isn't it that the ash is a large part in producing soap, and the ash being burnt ahead of time So it's kind of an interesting thing to think
Yeah.
about.
Pot ash. Yeah. You run rainwater or distilled water through pot ash, and that gives you lye, your alkali salts. Um, and that's the thing. You tell people, oh yeah, I make soap, and they think melt and pour, and then you tell them, no, I make it with lye, water, and fat, because that's historically what soap is made out of. And actually, if you go to like stores and stuff and you look at your local soap, some of them say like bath bar or body bar because they can't legally call themselves soap.
Mm.
You have to have lye in order for it to be soap. Otherwise, it's not soap, because it's actually and they're naturally occurring. This is a totally naturally occurring process, and it's alchemical. You bring all the ingredients together, they undergo a process called saponification. They become something completely different. And it's pretty interesting because rituals of purification can do the same thing. Now, what is really important is that, well, what about practical act in your life, actions that you can take, right? So the formula in the Golden Dawn is to purify and consecrate. You purify by water, you consecrate by fire, right? So you're going to purify the space through the fluidic, through the astral, through the etheric, and then you're going to consecrate, which is to dedicate for a purpose, to make consacre, like with holiness. You're making it holy. To make holy is to consecrate, right? When priests become bishops, they're not ordained, they're consecrated, they're made holy. So it's almost like a dedication when you consecrate something. But now the way I do that, and it took me years to figure this out, because you're doing it in ritual format over and over and over every single day. Every single ritual requires some sort of purification. And so then it just kind of happened that I began I found myself meditating, right, as part of my morning practice. That's something that I always do, or always did. Haven't done it in a while. And then go in and do ritual or prayer, right? I inflame myself with prayer. So I'm purifying the mental state. I'm achieving that calm. I'm getting rid of everything I held on to, everything that saturated my psyche, whatever I did during sleep, whether it was, just dreaming or astral travel or whatever it was. And then I'm going in and I'm starting my day in the early, early morning. The first things that are coming out of my mouth are prayers, inflaming myself, consecrating, dedicating myself, rededicating. And that is the trajectory of initiation, is to repurify and reconsecrate over and over and over. It doesn't end.
And then so when you're talking about like consecration, so is like something like holy water. I don't know what the source typically is, if it's just regular water, if it's spring water, if it's whatever. And then I would assume that there's some sort of consecration aspect to that, or
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be any kind of water, really. If you want to do spring water, go ahead. But and I speak as somebody who fairly regularly consecrates incense and water for those uses. I don't know how often I've mentioned this or if I have, but I am a deacon in a Gnostic tradition. Actually, I'm most likely I'll be receiving ordination as a priest in that order, in that tradition soon. But it's been many years of that kind of very low level stuff. And it begins with an exorcism. You exorcise the water, which isn't to say that it's got demons in it because it came from the city, from the tap, and it's not any more free of etheric influence or elemental influence just because you got it at a hot springs. Because what we're really talking about is any unwanted influence, perceived or unperceived. Right, there, etheric charge. There could be elemental contamination, that kind of stuff. Particular species of etheric energy in the land. Maybe things that have happened there, And you want to talk about Agrippa, he says that he refers to it in terms of air. Really, he meant ether, but he talks about how, like, if something really traumatic happens in a place, that energy will stay there for a really long time, and other people will be able to feel it and sense it. And that can be true of traumatic things that happen in the land or on the land. So the first step is to purify the water, which is to say, to exorcise it in the three names of God, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And then you consecrate it in under the same auspices, under the Trinity, to spiritually purificatory purpose. And that in and of itself, I mean, in all these things, there's the laying on of hands. So there is a transfer of etheric energy, and it is believed that when you are ordained, you receive the office of diaconate, which is a deacon. You're ordained a priest, and then consecrated a bishop. Forget about it. You're supposed to have achieved and actually are granted a further species of purification and holiness, right? Consecration, through those rituals, through those rites, and through your performance and partaking of the mass. That purifies you, so that when you go to lay hands on and consecrate this water, the etheric charge that's coming through isn't dog shit. Because that can happen, right? There's a lot of people doing Reiki out there. It's like, I don't know what you do with your energy body. You're putting your stuff into me. How do I know that you're a pure font of this energy? But, so it gets very dicey there. And the main thing to me is that, I really question whether or not people are just partaking in some level of secular escapist cosplay, where they don't really believe in these things, but rather they've just suspended disbelief for the time, so that they can engage with these things as a test to see if, can I re-enchant my world? So when people talk about left-hand path and doing demonic stuff and grimoire stuff, and or just even energy work, without the understanding, without even stopping to think, do I need to purify myself before I go and put whatever's running through me and somebody else, right, to heal? When that consideration gets just breezed by, to me, it seems like it's just some kind of secular tourism of, can I make myself believe this stuff? Is it fun? Can it help me psychologically? So, these are the things that people need to be thinking about. Everything has to be purified, because everything eventually has to be spiritualized.
All right. So I got a question. So is there like a limitation to the power of consecration? Like, for example, maybe you have a mason jar of water, or maybe you have a lake or a pond or a river. Like, what's the limit? Like, is there a potency aspect to consecration and then a duration of dissipation?
I would say the first thing that comes to my head is to the limits of thy strength. What level are you personally able to consecrate things at? It's like anything else. When you first start running, maybe you can only run, a small loop, and then eventually you're up to a marathon level. You can do more, and it's the same thing through purifying your own energy body, working on the etheric, working on the astral, working on the mundane skills of focus, will, attention, imagination. Those are the magical powers. People talk about, like, you say magical powers, and they start thinking about like Harry fucking Potter. And it's like, no, you possess the magical powers. That's what animals don't have. That we have that. That's why for centuries, millennia, human beings were considered, the highest creation, the most developed, the most godlike, and we are. But focusing, honing in on those mundane things like willpower and imagination, focus. These are magical powers. These will improve your ability to consecrate, to purify. Um, kind of one of the things about the saints, that's the whole thing, is like people always think that like Christianity is against magic. Catholicism is not against magic. In the New Testament, the only admonition is against pharmakoi or pharmakia, essentially herbalists. But the connotation was, witches, witch doctors and things like that. At the end of the day, magic has been with Catholicism from the very beginning. It's bursting with magic. So I completely lost my train of thought. But
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that the pharmakia thing. That was something, I think I brought that up with one of the interviews I did with Douglas Gabriel, because I was kind of picking his brain about that the particular verse or whatever it was. But because that's some of the common argument against things like that would be considered sorcery or whatever to some individuals. And to me, it seemed like the connotation of the word itself was geared towards the description of maybe herbalism done in the form of harm or something along those lines, or like a substance that is procured with ill intention, or like that. To me was what seemed like pharmakia was being alluded to.
Yeah, absolutely. Because pharmakia is different than iatros, which is doctor, right? Pharmakia is like an herbalist. And yeah, absolutely. Somebody who specifically works with plants to distill certain things and make certain potions and things like that. But I'm not sure where I was going to go with that, because I can't remember what I was saying before. I kind of went.
Well, my original question was about the.
Oh, I know. I remember.
Okay.
I remember. I was going for the saints.
Okay.
The saints were essentially magicians. They were people who could talk to animals. St. Francis made an almond tree bloom. These were but these were people who lived, lives of high restraint and high dedication, and that's another thing, in medieval Renaissance forms of magic. I mean, even up until like somebody as recent as Anton Kremers or Eliphas Levi, go even further. The founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, they were all saying like the only way you can gain magic powers, to become strong, magically strong, to the point where you could, as you say, perhaps consecrate a river, in perpetuity, is to live a saintly life, is to live a life of discipline, of control. Now, a little different in the Golden Dawn. In the Golden Dawn, they thought that if you could suffer a severe discipline in a city, you were even more powerful. You were even more holy, because I think Westcott puts it like he says something to the effect in one of the flying rolls that like it doesn't matter if you go live in a forest. If you're a slave to yourself, you will practice vice in that forest. So it's that kind of thing. So the level of available energy and quote unquote, I hate this word, but power available to a particular person depends on how much they have developed them in themselves. I don't think that anything is impossible, but you need to pay that price. Nothing is free. I'll put it that way. Nothing is impossible, but nothing is free.
And so like with the Trinitarian thing that you mentioned in regards to consecration or purification, and then you also mentioned like the laying on of hands as well. So is this done like in terms of methodology, this laying on of hands, and is it like some sort of Trinitarian prayer? Is that like the formula or the modus operandi of a traditional form of consecrating?
Yeah, I mean, so you consecrate holy water the same in a similar way. I'm not going to say the same, but the same way that you would consecrate a bishop or ordain a priest. There's a laying on of hands in those rituals, in those rites. You know, you're the officiating priest or officiating bishop, in the case of a bishop, has to lay hands, and in the case of a priest, right, has to lay hands on the candidate. So yeah, I mean that's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of Catholicism, and even recently when I was exploring the healing temples of Egypt, you can see the priest class doing the same thing. You know, somebody kneeling down in front of them, and either a pharaoh or a priest, literally just their hands like this floating over the person's head. I mean, and in the Catholic Church too, you know, you offer it, you're asked sometimes, the congregation is asked to offer a sign of blessing to a child who's brought to the altar, you know, before the congregation is either sick or is about to graduate elementary school or did really well in softball, who knows, community thing. But they say, you know, let us offer a sign of blessing, and you raise your right hand and you just do this. You face the palm towards them. Now, in Chinese medicine, you've got PC8, which is a major acupoint here, and it's one that is the right hand projects, the left hand receives. Now, I think personally, the dominant hand projects, you know, and the secondary or recessive, whatever you want to call it, hand, the non-dominant hand, receives. So you know, that is something that is well fleshed out in many forms of spiritual practice and just traditional thought, anatomy, philosophy. You know, anatomy and energy theory were not two separate things until fairly recently.
All right, sweet. So that answers a lot of my questions. That was really interesting. So, all right, symbols, implements in the practice and theory. So we see a lot of uh patterns of symbolism within things like the tarot. You know, they're a lot intertwined with various esoteric orders. I don't know if some are exclusive to the Golden Dawn, like I don't know, like the Crux Andanta or what. But yeah, they're
Crux ansata.
Sata. Yeah.
The crux ansata is just the ankh. That's all the crux ansata is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there was five in particular. I was just interested in kind of unpacking the symbolism and utilization within you know, Golden Dawn and whatnot. So one was the wands, and then the cups, daggers, the crook and scourge. Is that the right way to say that? Scourge?
Scourge, yeah.
Scourge. And then the crux on
Crux ansata.
Crunxansata.
So that's just a Latin term to refer to the ankh. And the ankh, in Egypt, I believe it means like key of life. So where do you want me to start?
Start with the wands.
Okay. Unequivocally, the wand represents the will. It should be an extension of the magician, and it has typically an elementally fire-based connotation. Now, if you look in other forms of magic, let's say you look at like Francis King and Dr. Skinner, right? One of his early works with Francis King. Brilliant. I mean, it's basically a reiteration of the Golden Dawn early stuff. There's nothing new in it, but there's highly informative stuff. It's called Techniques of High Magic. It's a great book for beginners, especially if you don't want to join an order. I recommend that one. The only thing is they correspond wands to air, which is no, absolutely not. The wand has a phallic germinative connotation, right? Now, if you're looking at the fourfold schema of the tetragrammaton, yod is the fiery germinative aspect. It looks like a sperm. And that's because it's supposed to be a seed, really, in that connotation, but also a flame. So a fiery flame, a fiery seed, which is what? A spark, right? Which we have in us, the Shekinah, the divine presence, the sparks of God. This is what the will is supposed to represent in the microcosm of the magician. It's supposed to represent the will, not the lower will, the higher will. Now we got a lot of times we got to work our way up, and there's some really cool stuff actually that I'm going to go into for the Agrippa course I'm teaching, that I am so 100% confident that this is, and I didn't even realize it till I started chipping away at it. The stuff that's in the first book of the Agrippa course that I'm giving is it is all of magic. It's the summa magica, complete magic. And there's a lot of ways to understand why we have to work from the material to get to the supra celestial, right? Go, not even the celestial, go past it, but you have to start with the material. The representation of that virtue, which is abstract and comes from the mind of God, the representation of that virtue in Malkuth of Asaya. And you work your way up. And so that's what the wands do. That is basically the long and short of it. I mean, I could go on, but I think there's something really apropos in being very concise and to the point about the will.
Alrighty. And then how about for the cups? That was my next one that I wanted to get a little bit of insight into.
So cups are the emotional nature, the heart, the receptive capacity. So the will is the projective, right? Like we say, it's that German, and I'm going to get a little crude here, but I'm not doing it to be gross. I'm doing it because everything in nature is the special example of overarching, completely transcendental principles. So if you look at the will, what is it? It has that phallic quality to it in the wand, right? And what does the male organ do when it is about to perform, right? It projects. It projects, right? It has to grow, and it projects forward. And then what is the act? Projection, right? And then what is the finality of it?
Multiplication.
Well, no. Yes, but before that, it has to project sperm. Everything is a pushing forward. And if you look at Chokmah, that is exactly the transcendental supernal principle of projection. Literally, the dot of Kether, the point having dimension but no spatial locality, turning into the line. It's moving. It's pure movement. Now, without the sort of thrusting block of Bina form, that energy dissipates to nothing. Nothing. It cannot find any ground to grow in. It exhausts itself. And this is why men and women work the way that they work, because it's not performative. We are physical expressions of the pattern of God, the pattern, the triune pattern of creation. Okay, it goes so far beyond nature. We are literally constantly reenacting the divine formula, and it's holographic and it's fractal and it's in everything all the time. Now, what we want to do in using these implements is isolate them, call them to the fore in the psyche, or Kabbalistically the ruach, I should say also in the sphere of sensation of the microcosm. And these things will start to burgeon forth, parts of our personality. If you work with the cups and you meditate on the cups, what are they? Receptive. They're containers, and if you start meditating on them, you become more receptive. You become more feminine. You become more of the Binah quality. If you saturate your psyche in that kind of symbolism, because the wand is incomplete without the cups. Once you're a Golden Dawn adept, every time you have one of your tools out, All of them have to be there.
Mm.
You can't go and just say, I'm just going to use my one. No, because now you have completely screwed up the equilibrium of the 4 elements in your sphere of sensation. Because all of these things, your element, your tools are your tools because they represent parts of your microcosm. And if you use one to the exclusion of the others, you're now altering that balance in your microcosm. So you will always want all 4 of your implements out there. Anytime you're going to use the cups exclusively, you've got to have the dagger, the pentacle, and the wand.
Well, I wasn't going to ask about that one. It hadn't crossed my mind, but obviously it is important. The pentacle. But maybe we could talk about the dagger first, and then we'll talk about the pentacle.
Well, one thing that I want to say too about the cup is that it holds water. Okay, and water is fluidic, and it's not just the emotional nature, it's the intuitive nature, the fluidic seas of the unconscious, the subconscious, that connection that to the astral realm. And not only that, but like also the etheric, if you can see it. And it's been described this way by Levy and by Mesmer, by tons of occultists. It is a fluid fire. It's a fluidic light. And to me, there's something about the cups that also suggests that. However, it also has a fiery aspect. So there's that to think about when you're thinking about cups. Mm-hmm. The dagger is the intellect. And now, for all the bashing of Crowley I've done, he had one amazing book, which is of use to a balanced magician, especially starting out, book 4. And part of that is because he would get high on hashish and pace and dictate it, and his secretary would type it out and organize his thoughts. So it's eminently readable and organized because he actually didn't write it.
Is that the book that has all the different correspondences in it, or is that a different book of his?
No. That's 777. 777 is barely fucking readable. It's essentially a magician's tables that were circulated in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That's what they did in the early order. You could have this for a week, and you pay us a penny or 2 pennies or whatever, 2 cents, whatever it was. You have this for a week, and you copy it by hand. And that's what all the curriculum and the grade material was. And they had these inner order pamphlets and tables that they passed around. 777 was a complete table, Kabbalistically, elementally, all that stuff. Okay. And Crowley basically, he plagiarized it. He published it and said it was his idea. And he appended some commentaries to it. But that aside, because I don't want to go off on a Crowley tangent just yet. I want to finish on the dagger. What he had to say about the dagger is incredible. And it's one of the best things I've ever heard anybody say about the dagger, especially because we live in a paradigm right now that all anyone has is a fucking dagger. It's the intellect. And the intellect brings hubris because it only knows how to do one thing. The dagger is a fitting implement for the intellect because the intellect has to analyze. What does analyze mean? We think, right? Because we don't understand. We have such cultural and just in general, we have this tendency to fucking amnesia generationally. We don't understand the original archaic meanings of these words. So we think analyze and we think like, okay, data analysis, or I got to mentally analyze this. Analysis means to take apart. That's what that's exactly. That's what that word means, is to take it apart. Synthesize is to put it together. Analyze is to break it down. And that's the only thing that a knife can do, is cut things into ever smaller pieces. So you will never be able to get to unity, to holism with the discursive mind. This is where I disagree with a lot of the early Greek philosophers. But I do not believe that is. I believe that was the nth degree in Aristotle, started bringing us down that track. And but I think eminently Plato, knowing that there was an unwritten doctrine, right, that Aristotle talks about in 2 of his books, Physics and Metaphysics, he says there was an agrapha dogmata in the Platonic tradition, an unwritten teaching or unwritten, dogma in that rule. And I think a lot of that was more mystical and less intellectual. And that's why people will look at the Platonic dialogues and think like, oh, this was science for the time. It sounds ridiculous now. It wasn't science. They're mystical documents. You're reading them wrong. And so
sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say that it kind of, when you're talking about that, it kind of brought me back to this thought on pharmakia. Seems to me like the whole notion of that was an overbalance of the intellect or the synthesis, but lacking that holistic implementation of the other elements. Like if I was to, it kind of just brought that to my mind when you're talking about that. And how true is that in terms of modern day, pharmaceuticals, because we have a lot of these, medicines that I'm very familiar with that are produced very holistically with every bit of intentionality and holism. And then we have these patented, synthesized compounds that they'll just add something to it just for the sake of making it different so that they can exclusively own and patent a particular compound, like things along these lines. Like that seems like the dark use of medicine or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean it's the commercial use, which is the dark use.
Yeah.
People will argue with me to death about financial implications and stuff like that, but ultimately for this episode it's neither here nor there. But at the end of the day, anytime that something is commercialized, it's essentially a dark usage of it. Right, mammon, right, that's what Christ said. You cannot serve two gods, or you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. With mammonos in Greek is money. And he also said it will be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not saying good can't be done with money, right? And I know lack of money, poverty causes a lot of evil. But the problem with that is that you're not looking at big enough of a fucking picture. You're on the ground. I'm in the sky. I'm looking at the whole thing and say like, it's the system. The system has got to fucking go, because that is the only thing that's keeping us trapped in everything we hate. Everything that bothers us is because we won't leave this financial system completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a different podcast, though.
It is. All right, so let's talk about the crook and the scourge. Scourge? Yeah.
Well, did you want me to hit on the pentacle?
Oh, yeah, please.
Remember, if I take one of my tools out, I gotta have all four of them.
Gotta have all four of them. I apologize.
Pentacle is elemental earth, whereas the dagger the dagger is air, I should say. So we're wand fire, cups water, excuse me, dagger air, pentacle earth. So now the thing is, it gets called a pentacle, but it's not a pentacle. It's a pantacle because it's a disc.
Oh.
And pantaculum in Latin means hung from the neck. So the disc is actually that they call it a pantacle, and it gets mistaken for pentacle. Penta meaning five. That pentacle is the pentangle, like the pentagram, but that's not what's on the Golden Dawn pentacle. It's the hexagram that's on the Golden Dawn pentacle. Because by the time you've made your tools, you should be an adept. You don't make your tools before you're an adept, because your microcosm is not balanced yet. It hasn't undergone the alchemy of the outer order, the solve et coagula formula. So if you're making tools without having undergone the solve et coagula, your tools are going to be out of balance. So that's the whole thing. And the hexagram represents balance, right? It's another great reason. It is the consummation of all four elements, right? Maybe we can include a graphic for this. Take the alchemical symbol for fire, the upright triangle, the alchemical symbol for water, the triangle apex downwards. You marry them, and from that marriage, you get air and earth, right? Mm-hmm. It's, the air, for instance, is the fire triangle with the bottom line of the water triangle through it, and then vice versa. The earth triangle is the water triangle with the basal line of the fire triangle running through it. So that's what the one of the significations or the symbolism of the hexagram on the pentacle. But it's supposed to represent, your physical life, your physical body, even, if you want to look at it in terms of like it's a disc, it kind of resembles a coin. Coins used to be made out of, they're still made out of metal, but metals are found in the earth. But it also serves as a shield. Really, the pentacle is a shield. Also, it's like a buckler, a small shield. But lots of uses for it, and that, in short, is it's about as much as I want to go into right now concerning that stuff.
Okay, cool. And then, so I guess let's move on and go to the crook and scourge. Scourge. Thank God we have you here to correct my pronunciation.
Nah, I'm obnoxious.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so there are certain things about the crook and scourge as they appear in the Adeptus Minor's ceremony that I cannot talk about. So if you're listening to this and you've been initiated and undergone the 5-6 curriculum, at least up until Zam, and either A, don't get it twisted, I know my shit, but also B, don't be afraid, I'm not going to say any of the advanced stuff. But if you look at a lot of Egyptian funerary statuary or art, you'll see in crossed position, their hands over their chest like this is the sort of like the burial posture, the mummification posture. And oftentimes they'll be holding a shepherd's crook. And I've not seen it in person, like in my travels in Egypt, but also sometimes they have a scourge. And a scourge is essentially a set of flails, like a cat o' nine tails. It's a whip.
Okay.
It's basically a rod, and at the end of it is dried animal skin, dried hide. It's leather, and it's used to whip horses, slaves. I don't know. The modern Egyptians insist that there were no slaves, and I tend to agree with them. To be honest, they insist that there was no slavery actually, and they found that in the Hebrew communities that assisted in their building projects, they found all the amenities of like community that you typically would not find in maybe servants, but not slaves. So yeah, so and their big defense on that is also like slaves can't build something this perfect. They're never going to give as much of a shit.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, me too. But anyway, again, my pointless digressions. But so a good ruler should be able to use both. And what are we aiming for in the Golden Dawn? When you're an adept, what are you an adept of? Well, you're an adept of the outer order, right? When you become a neophyte again in the inner order, right? You think you're hot shit, right? And you're not. You're a neophyte, and now it's only now that you can begin. All that other stuff was getting you ready to begin. And you should be attempting to become an adept over yourself. And so you have to become the ruler, in your own stead. That's developing the magical powers, will, imagination, focus, attention, intention. So there's a Kabbalistic significance to this. And the Kabbalistic significance is obvious, right? Mercy, the shepherd's crook, the good shepherd. I lead my people. I ultimately impart upon them a species of benevolence, right, in leading them. I'm not going to lead them astray. I'm not going to lead. And I'm talking about the symbolism of the crook. I'm not talking about what Golden Dawn adepts think of themselves, right? We have no people. But I'm talking about the symbolism of the shepherd's crook. If you don't know what it is, look it up. It's real quick. bishops typically carry it because they're shepherds of their quote unquote flock. But it's supposed to, right? If you, even in ancient Egyptian times before Christ, right, who was the good shepherd, even before that, in ancient Egyptian times, the crook was a symbol of a good leader. And the good leader had qualities like fairness, benevolence, loyalty to his people, you know, the desire to protect. But now what comes, how else to protect them? Well, you need to, so if the crook is on the side of mercy, then the scourge is on the side of Gebura. And like I continually tell people, nothing on the upright tree is evil. You need to know when and how to use it. Okay? You need the scourge in life for yourself, for other people. You set boundaries with yourself. You set boundaries for other people, right? You need to be able to whip yourself into shape. You need to be able to, you know, have that Gebura force, and they're working together. Okay? So a good leader and a good adept carries the crook and the scourge. But here's the thing. And I was asked this at a Masonic lecture that I gave a couple of nights ago for the Scottish Rite. There's a picture of me in between two sarcophagi, the mummies, you know, and at the temple of Hatshepsut. And, you know, they're like this, and I'm standing in the middle like this. And one of my very observant brothers, he said, so is there any reason why you have your left arm over the right? And I explained to him the Kabbalistic significance. It's always been this way in the Golden Dawn. This is in the earliest lectures. When you impose the tree of life on the human body, you back into it. You don't walk into it. So what does that mean? It means that the pillar of severity is on the left hand. The pillar of mercy is on the left hand. The pillar of severity is on the right hand. Okay? If you're looking at it, that's different. People say left-hand path. Well, the fucking joke's on you. But the thing is, actually, that term left-hand path comes from an earlier, I believe, Vedic tradition. I think like it has more to do with like Tantra, stuff like that. But like magicians will apply it to the tree of life, thinking like, yeah, severity. In actual, and this is the way that occult blinds are set up to trick you, so that you don't find it, unless you've had this teaching, you wouldn't know that the tree of life, you back into it. The pillar of mercy is on the left-hand side. So what we do in this posture, because Golden Dawn adepts assume this posture often in ritual, okay? It's extremely significant. The left hand is always over the right, because the crook always goes over the scourge. You always lead with mercy. Mercy has to know not when to apply itself, but when to allow severity to express itself. So the dominant thing is that my default thing that keeps this productive, that keeps this, noble, is the fact that my mercy is holding it back until now it's time to let the scourge out, because there is an application for it. So these are very, very important things. And there's other symbolism to them that if you want to know, go become a Golden Dawn adept, because I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, beautiful night. That was all super enlightening and informative. That was more cool than I thought it was going to be. So that's awesome. Now I have much to look forward to in regards of unveiling those mysteries. All right. So then the crooks on Shasta. Crooks on Shasta.
Yeah.
Crooks on Shasta.
Just call it the ankh.
The ankh.
The crooks on Sata is obviously the ankh. Now, there's lots of things I could say about it, but what is prudent? It's the key of life, technically. And rather than unfolding and saying things that technically I've taken obligations not to talk about, I'm going to throw some stuff at you. Look at the shape of the ankh and look at where and when it appears. Who is holding it in like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics? And another thing is contemplate what it looks like, right? So I can lead you to this. I can lead you at least this far about the Crook Sansata. The Crook Sansata is the key of life. It's the key to the gate of life, right? And one of the things, hold on one second. So maybe that was a little bit of a synchronicity, like don't tell them anymore.
Yeah.
But I'll take you this far. Crook Sansata is the key to the gate of life. It is the key of life. And it resembles what?
You gonna ask me?
Yeah. What does it resemble? Think about
well, I would think it has something to do with the feminine and masculine coming together. Maybe the
to a degree. It's definitely more heavy on the feminine than it is on the masculine. The Crook Sansata. Now, this is one of those
portal,
things that's
that's
very interesting.
Portal.
That's very see, now you're onto something. The Crook Sansata, according to when like Max Heindel and all these guys, these old fucking 19th 20th century Rosicrucians, they were talking about how the Crook Sansata, and I don't think they're wrong, but it's I wouldn't be so bold as to assert that, but it's an interesting correlation. Crook Sansata being the ancient form of the symbol for the planet Venus.
Mm.
They're the same thing. It's a cross surmounted by a circle.
And your I guess traditionally it's common understanding the ancient Egyptians, they were more of a matriarchal or patriarchal society, or
they were absolutely 110,000%. They were not a matriarchal society. Okay. There were like I think like 3 or 4 female pharaohs, and the only one, and they had to rule because they had this thing about bloodlines in ancient Egypt, which we can get into that, the occult significance of blood and things like that, because that's I mean, I learned more about that from the Taoist perspective, because Taoist stuff is way more, it embraces chi theory. Chi theory is the first thing you learn, and then everything else is secondary. Chi is etheric energy. So it's that's really interesting. But they had this thing about bloodlines, and so when female leaders took the throne, they did so because they had to, because either their sons were not old enough or incompetent, or somebody had died. And Hatshepsut was one of the new kingdom lady pharaohs, and she was the only pharaoh to rule in Egypt in a time of prosperity. She did a great job. And that's not to say anything about women, but it's more so that historically, incontrovertibly a patriarchy. But in terms of, let me back up. Incontrovertibly a patriarchy in terms of the outward presentation. Okay, because the marriage was extremely important, and particularly in the New Kingdom statuary in Luxor and Karnak, you see the pharaohs, the great pharaohs, sitting beside their queens. They're not just portrayed. This is the royal couple, and that is very, very important. They didn't separate male and female, but the masculine embodied the active out there. out in public, is the face of things, warlike a lot of the time. And then the feminine, receptive, was more of the power behind the power, the other half of the duo, but just not the public face of it all. But they didn't, it was huge. I mean, even if you look at the Opeth festival and stuff like that, they, in their pantheon of gods, there was always some kind of pair, male female pair, and because they understood that this is the way the underlying pattern of the universe is male female. It's just it's lock and key. That's all anything is. You can look at it from human sexuality and reproduction to like enzymes. You could go like granular, molecular, microbial. It's all
Well,
in
Ike,
one way
aren't you,
or the other.
aren't you aware? Males can have babies these days. So it's 2023. So
Yeah, we're not going to be around for that much longer. That's okay. I don't feel too bad about that. But,
just kidding.
no, I
Uh,
know. But yeah, so that's I think that answers that. I mean, obviously the history, particularly the ancient history of Egypt, the old, middle, and new kingdom, that's a huge swath of time. So I'm sure somebody could, some, you know, stuffy, uptight academic with like this really horrible voice could point to some obscure passage that says, no, actually, but the truth of the matter is, yeah, that's what we're left with, right? I mean, how many did you know of any names of the female pharaohs, or like have you heard of Hatshepsut before?
I only know like a couple even male pharaohs, so
Right. So it's like, because that wasn't a thing.
yeah, that's interesting. And look how successful they were with their society. We still have the beautiful remnants to this day.
Yeah.
Maybe can give a little overview and insight into like the within the Golden Dawn there, I've just come across different grades, and it's always been a mystery to me when I see like it'll say like 2 = 9 or 3 = 7. Like, what's the scoop in the significance with this numerological like correspondences in regards to the grades? Like, what's that all about?
I mean, at least as far as I am aware, um, this is one of those things in the Golden Dawn that you scratch your head at when you're a newbie, and then you just kind of like you get all this material dumped in front of you that you have to just push through and get tested on and all this crazy stuff, and that never ends. Even as an adept, I'm taking more tests. But you get all that stuff thrown at you, and then you just kind of forget about the numbering systems. But the numerical system has to do with the Sephirot on the tree of life.